I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. We're bringing together experts, thinkers, and leaders, busting myths, sharing stories, and staying connected when Canadians need it the most. We're having unexpected conversations for unprecedented times. Hi, everyone. Today we are talking to Claire Bidwell Smith. Claire is an internationally renowned author. She's a speaker and she is a grief expert. And I am lucky enough to call her a friend. I wanted to have her on today to talk about grief and anxiety and where we're at in this worldwide pandemic and how we all process grief in different ways. So, Claire, thank you so much for being
here. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to. You've been busy these days.
I have been busier than I've ever been in my entire, 15-year career as a grief therapist, an expert and author. I can't believe I wrote a book called Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief a couple of years ago. And there is no way I could have ever imagined that when it came out in paperback, the entire world would be experiencing grief and anxiety. It has been the strangest experience in a field that I've been in for so long, and then suddenly to have everyone going through it all at once.
Because when we think about grief, and listen, maybe we should just back up a step here. What makes you an expert?
Personally, both of my parents died of cancer by the time I was 25. So I've lived a lot of my own grief. I've also lost several other really dear people to me along the way. But I kind of entered into young adulthood in the throes of grief. So I know it really personally. And then I got my master's in clinical psychology. I became a therapist. I worked in hospice for a number of years and then private practice, specializing in grief. So I have talked to probably thousands of people about their journeys of grief and loss. I've written 3 books about grief and loss. And I just talk about it all the time with everybody, including my kids.
Mm-hmm. Your first book, The Rules of Inheritance, is your memoir about your journey through grief of losing your parents, and it's in my top 5 books of all time for sure.
Thank you.
It's the most beautiful book, and I recommend it to everybody because it really it allows people to understand that we all feel grief in different ways, and we all process it different. And some of us don't process it at all, do we?
No, we don't. Grief is it's a curious creature. It's kind of inescapable. So even for those of us who don't process it or try to push it away, it spills out in other places, right? It spills out in anger, anxiety, resentment, fear, depression. Grief can hide in murky places. And it can last a long time, so you can try to ignore it for years, but it'll still be there waiting for you when you're ready.
And so is grief, do we have this idea that grief is only when someone close to you dies? That's the only time you're allowed to feel grief.
I think that's what our culture thinks, but that's not true. And that's been something I've been talking about so much the last few months, because we've all been grieving, even if we haven't lost someone in the last few months. Either we are grieving the loss of jobs, or we're grieving our children home from school and camps. We're grieving things that we were supposed to be doing this summer. We're grieving just hearing the news every day, hearing the numbers, watching systems fall apart, administrations fall apart. There's so much grief happening. And we have always grieved on many different levels, but right now the whole world is kind of doing it together, which is a really interesting thing. But yeah, grief is not just the loss of a person.
So, but it seems embarrassing for some people. And I mean, I've lost an animal before. I know you have a pet. And then, you can be I'm just using a pet as an example because people are like, well, how could you be so sad about, your dog dying? It's not a person. It's a dog. Come on, get over it.
Oh my gosh, pet loss is huge. And I think people really disregard pet loss, or they think they should. It's unavoidable. When you've lost a pet, like the sweet dog picture behind you, I mean, that is real, true grief. And it's huge. And it's often bigger than people imagine. And then they think they shouldn't be feeling it because it's just a pet. But that is true grief. I lost a cat 2 summers ago. And for all my expertise in grief, I could not believe how much it brought me to my knees. And I think that we need to allow for it and we need to honor it and we need to feel it. Grief is as natural as anything else we go through in life. It is a part of our lives, always. None of us are going to escape it.
What I've learned from you is so you have three small children. Well, Vera's growing up as fast as mine are too, but I mean, little kids who never met your parents, yet they know who your parents are. You celebrate your parents. You talk about your parents with them. You're on Instagram all the time sharing stories about your journey with grief and your parents. And it's really opened up this conversation. Why did you want to be so open with your kids about two people? I know how important they are to you, but how did you get them to understand your relationship with your parents?
I'm not sure they do understand my relationship yet, but they have their own relationship with my parents. And that's what was important to me. 20, 30 years ago in the grief world and beyond, the philosophy and the thinking was that when we lost someone we love, we need to move on and let go of them. You lose a spouse, you get a new one. You lose parents, you just move on. Like you'll be okay. When I was 18 and my mom died, even though she was kind of my everything and my whole world bottomed out, everybody around me was like, "Oh, you're fine. You're an adult now. You're 18. Just move on with things." And what we've discovered, clinically in the grief world in the last 20 years is that doesn't work. What we need to be doing is creating spiritual relationships with our lost loved ones, creating internal relationships with them, passing their memories down. Other cultures do this much better, right? There's so many cultures that actually honor our ancestors, honor people that were in our families that came before. Western culture isn't so great at it. But it's been very meaningful to me and helpful to my family to integrate that into the system that we have here. So my children do know so many stories about my parents. Anything I do that one of my parents taught me, I'm always very meticulous about making sure I mention it. Like, oh, well, you like this soup? My mom taught me how to make this. We would stand here and do this. My mom did it like this. My mom, all the time telling stories. And so now they tell their own stories about them.
And another thing that I have learned from you is I can't remember, you were living in California at the time, and I can't remember if it was a hamster that died or something died, and you had this, or if it was even a bug. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but you and your girls had this little ceremony in the backyard. And I learned a lot from that because I am one of those people that I just want to push it all away and not talk about it and don't see me cry and all that. But I honestly can't. It could have been a gecko. I have no idea what it was that died. But you had this ceremony with the girls in the backyard.
We have a lot of ceremonies and a lot of pets because we have a lot of pets. I think it was a butterfly. I think we had
I think you're
butterflies
right.
from some cocoons, and then one of the butterflies died, and we had a little ceremony. We had a whole burial spot out in the backyard because there were all kinds of things. I actually, right, you just reminded me that I've got some fish up in the freezer, some like goldfish that died recently, and we need to go and have a little ceremony this weekend.
Right.
But I think that ceremony and ritual are so important, and I think they help us. They just help us kind of move through these things. And that's one of the hardest parts about the pandemic right now is that people are losing loved ones and they are not able to be with them in the hospital. They're not able to hold their hands and say goodbye. And then once they're gone, they're not able to have a funeral or a memorial or sit Shiva or have somebody come over and give them a hug and a casserole, like going through those things, being able to create those rituals, those memorials, having funerals, those things really help us understand grief, move through it, hold it, cope with it. When we take those away, I think it's much more difficult to get through. And I've been talking a lot in interviews and online about creating our own sense of ritual, and that's what I do with our pets, right? Like there's no formal funeral system for pets, but we can do those on our own, so I've taught my girls a lot about that. They're always like, what do we do? And I'm like, say something nice about the fish, and they're like, you were very pretty or whatever it is, just a moment to honor something that we loved and that was in our life.
And if we teach kids this, like I think about if I was taught these things when I was a kid, I would probably it wouldn't make grief easier, but it would make it more understandable. Is that the, to help move through it in a peaceful, positive way, as positive as you can be?
I think if you're not taught these things and then grief happens inevitably, you're just left just stunned, right? Like the floor is out from underneath you and you have no idea what to do. And this happens time and time again. I mean, I have so many people that end up in my office on the couch across from me, and this is what's happened. They have no idea where to turn, how to get through it.
What are you hearing from clients or people that are talking to you, interviews? What are people feeling right now? You're in South Carolina. I'm in Vancouver. We're in two very different places. And what are you hearing? This is what you do for a living. So what are people saying?
There's a lot of anxiety. I mean, it's really difficult to sit in all this constant uncertainty. There's nothing to hold on to, right? We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know how it's going to play out. We don't have any clear direction, especially in the US, from our administration on what to do, how to do it. I led a support group for women who had lost their moms to COVID a couple of months ago or a month ago. And it was 12 women who had all lost a mom this spring to COVID. They were all about our age. They were all in their 40s, and their moms had been in their 60s, 70s, and they had lost their moms. And there was a lot of anxiety that they were feeling, but also a lot of anger. They had so much anger, anger that we weren't prepared for something like this. Anger at people that weren't complying with just pretty basic, mask wearing, social distancing. Just so much frustration and anger and anxiety.
So how do you help a group of women like that? Like, how do you work through that?
In some ways there's nothing you can do except hold space for it, right? So it's helpful just to be able to come to a space where you can talk about it, right? We met over Zoom just to be with other women who were going through it, to have that kind of understanding, to not feel so alone. A lot of grief education. Sorry if you can hear my toddler screaming. We're all in the house together. A lot of grief education. Like a lot of people, when they come to talk to me, the first thing they'll tell me is that they think they're doing something wrong. However they're grieving, it's wrong. They're not grieving enough. They're grieving too much. They can't stop crying. They haven't cried yet. They're angry, they're sad, they're depressed, they're scared, they're not sleeping, they're sleeping too much. They're not eating, they're eating too much. Whatever it is, they're doing it wrong. So a lot of my work is just talking about grief and talking about how it works and how individual it is and how there's no right way to grieve, helping people kind of just find their way through their own grief process.
So let's talk about anxiety and grief. When you wrote that book, people weren't talking, they weren't connecting anxiety and grief together. And when you said you were writing Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, it was like a light bulb came on. Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. Anxiety. Yes, this makes sense. Why hadn't we been discussing that as, a global community before?
Yeah, I know. It wasn't anywhere. No one had really been talking about the link between grief and anxiety. And I think part of it's the stigma around anxiety, around grief itself. I think part of it is there's been an uptick in anxiety. I really do believe in the last couple of decades. I think technology has lent a lot to it. I think world affairs and Western culture and just kind of the way we're doing things has really increased anxiety. I mean, we're seeing numbers in our children and adolescents and college kids that we never saw before in terms of anxiety. So I think there is more of it. And then I think it really has always been a part of grief and just not acknowledged. Even C.S. Lewis wrote about that. He said, "I never knew grief felt so much like fear." And it's a natural component of it. And it's not dissimilar to what we're feeling right now in the pandemic, that uncertainty, that suddenly the rug has been pulled out from underneath your life. You will never go back to the way we lived. We have a new normal. All of those kinds of things that we've been feeling. You feel those when you lose someone you love. You're starkly reminded of your mortality, and it's frightening, and then you become afraid to lose more.
Yeah. So I would ask you, since you're, an expert, this is what you do. Do you have anxiety still over your grief, or is this is it something that you can make go away? Or is it something that once you're aware of it and you're able to move through it, it just becomes not easier, but
Manageable.
yeah.
I do have anxiety and I manage it in a much different way than I did. You know, when my mother died, I started having panic attacks. I ended up in the ER a couple of times having panic attacks. And no one at the time, not one doctor, connected it to the fact that I just lost my mom, you know, and that my life had just upended and my father had also had cancer and was going to die. Like, no one told me that I might be experiencing anxiety because of those things. Instead, they asked me about my eating habits and if I took drugs and like if I exercised, you know, and so I thought there was just something wrong with me. And it took until I was going through college courses and studying psychology and reading about PTSD and just I started to put the dots together myself. And so I have been grappling with my own anxiety for years. And then I started writing about it 5 or 6 years ago online as a component of grief. And I just got flooded with emails and clients in my office saying, oh my God, is this a real thing? This anxiety and grief? And so because I had so many clientele, I was able to really study it in so many people, so many similar stories, ER visits, panic attacks, hypochondria, you know, worrying that they're going to get sick too because they lost someone to an illness. And to answer your question, I don't think it's ever possible to truly get rid of anxiety. I mean, it's a useful tool. We all have some level of it, right? It helps us to prepare for things. It helps us to get ready for a presentation or to go on a trip. There's a level of it that we always want to have. When it gets unmanageable, when it's creating, you know, behaviors that are problematic, when we're not able to leave the house because we're so anxious, things like that, then it needs to be dealt with. So my anxiety is at a really manageable place. You know, it will spike. The pandemic happened and I got really anxious, but I knew how to handle it. I knew what to do. I knew not to, let myself completely fall apart and fall into poor behaviors as a result.
Mm-hmm. So what about those of us that, you know, what if somebody's listening right now and they're feeling all the things that we're talking about and it's probably spiked by the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
What are there, you know, at what point do you know that you need to seek professional help? And then what are some things that we can maybe do to help manage it ourselves to a point, I guess?
You know, I think if you're starting to realize that it's making you uncomfortable all the time, or if it's creating problems in your relationships or your relationships with substances, right? If you're drinking too much as a result, or overeating because you're feeling panicky, or if you're constantly obsessing about your health in a way that's clearly, you know, overboard, or if you're afraid to leave the house, although right now we're not supposed to leave the house, so that doesn't really count. Anyway, if it's obviously affecting you in those ways, then it needs treatment. Start by just, acknowledging that you have anxiety. That's one of the first things. We spend so much time trying to convince ourselves that it's something else. Something else is bothering us, or we just need to power through this. Stop, take a breath, admit that you're anxious, admit that you're afraid. That's okay. It's completely okay to feel anxiety. I would say talk to your doctor, read some books about it. Meditation is one of my all-time favorite tools for anxiety. And I know that sounds annoying or daunting to people. But what meditation does is it helps us take a break from our thoughts. And what anxiety is, at its purest form, is fear-based thoughts. We are having a reaction to a fear-based thought that is either real or not real, So doing some meditation, some breath work to take some distance from that are some really quick, easy things you can do.
You are not the first person I've spoken to that talks about meditation as a way of, everyone talks about it, and which tells me it works. Uh-huh. Like every expert professional doctor, when it comes to, well-being of any sort, always brings it back to meditation. And I find that fascinating because I don't want to say it's a simple thing to do, because for some people it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But it's really in our control to try that, at least.
The most difficult part of it for me is just having so many children in my house. It's like I really can't find a quiet spot most of the time to do this. But meditation, it's an incredible thing. Think about how in the morning we wake up, we reach for our phones before we're even out of bed, right? You pick up your phone. Within 2 minutes, the amount of information you have downloaded into your brain, right? You've looked at the news. You know what the president tweeted last night. You know what your best friend had for breakfast. You know that your other friend's going to go camping today. Like, you know so much information so quickly. And then you get up and you like just go about your day without really taking some time to understand that you just downloaded so much stuff that could be making you anxious or sad or scared or emotional. You know, we just get out of bed and it's time to make some coffee and like amp ourselves up some more, you know? So meditation is the way to take a step back from all that and to just calm down and clear out your brain for a minute.
Yeah, it sounds perfect. It sounds like the whole world could use one big meditation right now.
Absolutely.
When do you think that collectively we respect grief when someone's going through it, or do we look at it as like, do we have compassion for others that are moving through grief?
Yes and no. Yes, initially, I think we absolutely do. You know, I think someone that we know is going through that, or we see it in a public way, like when Kobe Bryant died or something like that, we absolutely have a ton of compassion and we jump up and we stand up for it. We show up at things, we send casseroles and flowers and notes. And then around the like 5 week, 6 week, 8 week mark, we move on. And if the person hasn't moved on, it makes us uncomfortable. So we start to give them messages that it's time to move on, you know, like, hope you're better now, or we just stop talking about it altogether. And for the person who's grieving, it's a completely opposite experience, right? The first 6 weeks for a person who's just gone through a big loss is a total blur. It's like all this busy stuff you've got to manage, funerals and casseroles coming to the house and the whole mess of it. And you can't even think straight and you can't feel anything and you're just a mess. And then around the like 6 to 8 week mark, just when everybody drops out, you start to really feel it and start to feel really sad and really alone. And that's exactly when everybody else wants you to start getting better and you're just beginning. So yes and no.
What are like? How do we? I think a big part of it is we just don't know what to say to people who are grieving, whatever that grief is, right. And almost like we have a hierarchy of what is acceptable for grief. So if you lose a loved one, that's like at the top. Whereas if you lose a job, it's kind of like, okay, it was just a job. You'll get another one. This will turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. How do we support people, or what do we say? Like, sometimes we just don't even know what to say besides I'm sorry.
You don't have to know what to say, you know, and I think this is where people trip up and say the wrong thing because they're trying to say something helpful, but often there is nothing to say. The only thing you can do is show up and let them know that you're there and that you're thinking of them. Don't ask a grieving person what you can do because they don't know. They're a mess. They're like, I don't know what you can do. Either tell them you're coming over and you're bringing them food and you're going to clean out their fridge and take out their trash or whatever, or just tell them you're here and I'm here to listen. Meet them where they are. Meet them with curiosity. How are you today? How do you feel? What is grief like? Let them dictate how it goes. We bungle it because we are so uncomfortable. You know, and it's well intentioned, right? We just don't like to see people we care about in pain.
And it's hard to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what to do. Yeah. So, are there different, so when we say, or when you say anxiety, the missing stage of grief, what are the stages of grief? Like, where are we when we are grieving? What happens in our stages?
So they're denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And they were coined by a Swiss physician named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 60s. She was amazing. She was a pioneer. She was a rebel. She was, really a feminist. She was working in a hospital in Chicago, and she was working with dying patients who were terminally ill. And what she was noticing was that no one was paying attention to their experience. They were all headed into death, and the doctors were just treating their symptoms and trying to just get them through to the end. And she was really curious to kind of talk to them and hear about their experiences. She started bringing them on stage at medical settings in the hospital to have other physicians actually hear what they were going through on an emotional level. And it was pretty mind-blowing work at the time. Still is in some ways. Mm-hmm. And she ended up writing a book about the 5 stages of death and dying. And they took off. And those 5 stages make a lot more sense in death and dying, right? Denial. First, we're in denial that we have a terminal diagnosis. Then we're angry Then we're bargaining with our doctors, our higher powers, ourself. Then we get depressed. And then we kind of move into a level of acceptance. Those 5 stages, she then transferred onto the grief process. And she herself admitted that they don't work as well. Grief is not as linear as that. And it's not as particular as that. We don't move through those 5 things exactly in that way. Some of us don't even experience all of those stages, or we have different ones that aren't included. We move through them in different ways. And I think that one of the reasons the reason it became so popular and took off, that everyone knows the 5 stages, is because we would love for there to be a formula. Wouldn't it be great if there were just these 5 things you had to do, right? You lose your husband and your whole life has fallen apart, and you just have to move through these 5 stages and then you're going to feel better. So we kind of cling to that in the hopes that that's what we have to do. And then we kind of get mired up in them. And that's when people come into my office and they're like, I am so lost. I skipped a stage. I'm stuck in a stage. I don't get this one. What am I doing? So yeah.
I never thought of it like that, because I knew what the stages are, but I didn't know where they came from.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right?
It is fascinating, and it's interesting when you start reading about grief, especially when you're not in it.
Right.
It's almost like just this. If we had this knowledge ahead of time, which none of us have time for, it would because when you're in it, you are not. Sometimes you're not capable of really doing anything.
Yeah, it's true. I had this really fascinating conversation with a Canadian woman recently, this duo. They run a beautiful company called Being Here Human, and they do grief support and grief education. And they were talking about, like, what if grief wasn't this like big, terrible thing? What if when we came into the world and we were educated as we went along, that we're all going to grieve at some point. We're all built to do it, just like we are built to have children and to go through things. It's going to be part of it. We're going to come together as a community and support one another when it happens, so that when it does happen, it's not this isolating, lonely, scary, confusing thing, right? It's this thing that we all know is going to happen, and we move through it and support each other when it does. And it was such a like, wow, why don't we do that?
Why don't we do that? Yeah. Why don't we be open about it and discuss it and cry openly? I grew up thinking that crying was a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And so, you cry in private, not in front of people, because it will upset the other people.
Right.
When you see somebody crying.
Yeah. And I think that does a disservice to our emotional realm, and that's where we end up in anxiety or anger or depression, when we can't really let ourselves feel the things that we need to feel. Then it spills out in other places.
The other day, I think that we were texting, and we somehow, I can't remember how we came upon this, but we were texting, or you texted about how you were noticing that when a woman loses a husband. Mm-hmm. I mean, this really hit me, Claire. It really did. When it made me think, and it's so true. When a woman loses a husband, we don't really hear about it. Mm-hmm. Whereas when a man loses a wife, it's like this poor man, and he's lifted up, and and then you turned it another way, and you said, when a Black woman or a woman of color loses mm-hmm. a husband, no one notices.
Right. It's really true. It's amazing. It was in response. There's a couple of authors. Like, there's 3 that I can think of who are white men, and they all lost a wife, and they have just been heralded as like these just survivors and champions, and like, oh my gosh, they've gotten through this really hard experience, and they've gone on to be on Oprah, and they've had book clubs, and I'm just like, what? I can't tell you how many women I know who have gone through this experience, and no one cares. Like, they're not thought of as like these incredible heroes in this way that the men are. And that goes for white women of color. Like, it's pretty mind blowing. And I think, men and grief is a whole nother conversation. It's a really interesting topic. Men grieve typically very differently. And they are also really taught not to talk about it as much and not to talk about their emotions. One of the few people I have seen really be open about grief is Joe Biden, when he talks about his son. And I've seen him cry a couple of times. I think when he was around John McCain's death, he was talking about grief a bit. And it was startling to see a man talking about grief. It's startling to see. And I think that's also part of why there's such a big response to these men who've lost their wives. And it's sad. It's because men are really taught not to allow themselves these emotions, these vulnerabilities. And women are much more taught to be open about it. Not completely, but more. And so when the men go through it, we jump in as the nurturers and we jump in to save them. But that doesn't happen in reverse,
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've never looked at it that way before. And it rings true for me when I think about it. And if we do see a man cry
Mm-hmm.
publicly, I think it makes everybody uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was a kid, we were just taught that, men are this and women can be emotional, men can't be emotional.
Yeah, totally. Have you seen that? Have you seen those Bad Moms movies?
No, I haven't. Should I?
They're great. In the first one, there's like a hot dad at the school, the elementary school pickup or whatever, and his wife had died. And all the moms are like, oh my gosh, they're all checking him out and they're like bringing him stuff. If there was a woman standing there and all the men knew that her husband died, would they be lining up to take her and her kids on? No,
You're right.
It's this thing.
It is a thing. So where do we go from here when we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic? It's uncertain. We don't know how this is going to end. We don't know when it will end, if it will. You're right. We know nothing right now. How do we navigate this anxiety and maybe grief that we're feeling from all the things we're missing out on? What do we do?
I think we have to give ourselves permission to feel it, to own those feelings. We have got to stop shaming people. This has got to stop. We're judging right now, there's so much shaming going on and judgment going on, especially online and in social media, of how different people are handling this or what they're doing with their families or how they're feeling if they're missing something, like they're missing a summer vacation or something and they get shamed for it. And I think that we have to allow ourselves to feel whatever it is we're feeling and stop all the judgment. Whatever you're feeling, your grief is the biggest grief that you know. You can't step into someone else's grief. It's just impossible. You have to honor your own and let it be okay.
And I've heard you say that before, grief shaming.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard anybody say that before, but we do that, don't we? Sometimes, especially on social media.
We definitely do. Like a celebrity will feel sad about missing her vacation or whatever. It's still her life and her vacation. Worry about your own stuff. Like concentrate on you. I think one of the things we can really do during this time to grapple with all of this, in addition to owning it and acknowledging it, is work on our own internal lives. There's all these remember in the beginning when everyone was like baking bread and like doing like ab challenges? I think that instead of doing those kinds of things, we can be working on our internal selves. Do a meditation challenge, do like some yoga, work on your spiritual side, read some spiritual books, work on your sense of ritual and ceremony, create a little altar in your house.
Yeah, it can be whatever you want. There's no rules.
Right.
When it comes to that. And I never did a bread challenge or an ab challenge, but I'm up for a meditation challenge for sure. So just in case people are not familiar with your books, your first book, The Rules of Inheritance, your memoir and your journey through grief.
Yeah.
From the loss of your parents, a fantastic book that is in how many countries now?
19.
Yeah. And then after that, you wrote After This.
I wrote a book called After This, which is all about the afterlife and how to. This is like another stage of grief. I think it's this stage that people go through where they lose someone they love and they suddenly want to know where they are. They question like what happens when we die, and they hadn't really thought about it before, or they'd had some kind of bland upbringing that they were attached to that they just didn't really question, and now they're questioning everything: their God, their religion, their spirituality, their lack of it. So I wrote this book that kind of delves into all of it, how our connection to the afterlife affects our grief. And then the most recent one,
And you went and saw mediums, and you went and saw everybody. You experienced it all.
I did. Rabbis, priests, psychic mediums, shamans. It was exciting.
It was. And then, of course, anxiety, the missing stage of grief. And you have retreats all the time that people can check out on your website, clairebidwellsmith.com. You do a lot of grief with people who have lost their moms.
I do, yeah, and their fathers too. And I have a lot of online courses, and I've been trying to. Everyone in the grief world, which is really beautiful, has been trying to really step up and brace for the support that's needed right now. So we've all been trying to create online platforms and support groups and courses, and it's been heartening to see how much people do care.
Mm-hmm. And I think that what I've noticed from you is that people in the grief, who are grief experts in that community, have really come together to support other people.
It has been amazing. I felt like a kind of a one-woman show for a while, and now I've been collaborating with so many others in the grief space, and it's been really, really exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And also you can follow Claire on Instagram. She's at Claire Bidwell Smith, and she's also on Twitter at Claire Bidwell. But if you just go to her website, clairebidwellsmith.com, you can find everything there. You can buy her books at your favorite bookstore online, and they're all really good, I promise you. Claire, I can't thank you enough for being here.
I love talking with you, always.
I love talking to you, and I just... I'm so happy that you have created this space that allows us to understand grief a bit better, and how we can move through it in a gentle way that is healing for us, and more understanding, and how we can raise our families to understand grief as they get older too.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is that I don't want people to miss the part about grief that's beautiful. There's a lot of beauty to it. It's a reflection of how much we love somebody. It's a reflection of how much we love something, a pet, a place, but it's also really transformational. Like grief asks us to really look at ourselves, to kind of pare things down to our essence, think about what means what to us in this world, and kind of embrace that. So I think that there's a lot of power and beauty and transformation in grief, as well as all the rest.
See, this is why I love you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast at Tell Us Talks with Tamara Taggart, and our YouTube channel at Tell Us Talks. And you can join us here on Tell Us Talks with Tamara Taggart every